Well, you guys asked for this to be a series.
We're making it a series.
If you missed the first episode of this new series, check it out here. I'm so thrilled you guys enjoyed the first one. And this episode is sponsored by your friends and my friends at Max Aroma. We talk about them every month. They are one of the channel sponsors. They are a fragrance distributor who sells fragrances for lower prices than you'll find them in stores. Like many other websites out there, they have a vast selection and catalog of niche and designer fragrances. They have great ways for you to sample fragrances. They sell awesome little decants that you can buy. They have an awesome rewards/loyalty program, which you should definitely take advantage of if you are a relatively frequent shopper at Max Aroma. And on top of all that, pretty much all the fragrances I'm talking about in this episode can be found at Max Aroma, and there will be a link down below in the description. We're talking about upgrades to super uber duper hyped popular fragrances. We can also call them alternatives because I'm not trying to imply that these fragrances I'm replacing are bad fragrances. As we mentioned before, my alternatives will not be fragrances that are the same but smell better, are cheaper alternatives, are stronger alternatives, nor are more mass appealing. Once again, the most important thing I'm trying to convey here is that I'm simply trying to give you guys some newer picks that you don't see gracing your YouTube feed all the time. And as we talked about in the last episode, Fragrantica is what I believe to be a pretty decent barometer of a fragrance's popularity within the online fragrance community. And the easiest way to find this out is not by the number of comments, because you can't even see the number, you'd have to count them, which is ridiculous, but you can tell by the number of votes that a fragrance has. Why? Because voting is way less time consuming than leaving a comment. So as a result, there's going to be way more votes than comments on any particular fragrance's page. As with many things like this, you're going to have things split up into thirds. That's just how people work. For some reason, a third of people vote regularly on many fragrances across the site. Another third of people vote every now and then, and the final third of people will never vote. So what that means is that a fragrance that has thousands of votes is one that has a ton of traffic, because most of that traffic is not actually being reflected in those votes. We just talked about it. Approximately, you could imagine that the number of votes you see represents about only a third of the people who have visited or engaged with that page. That's pretty crazy. I used this as an example before, but for instance, my fragrance Second Soul, which has been out for almost a year now, which is crazy, even though it's been on the market for this long, it only has about 109 votes on Fragrantica. And I want to thank maybe the 4 of you who have voted since the last video. I really appreciate you guys. But as I said before, I can assure you that more than 109 people have experienced Second Soul. Meanwhile, a fragrance like Acqua di Gio Parfum from Armani, which just came out this past summer, is already approaching 700 votes. So let's get this out of here. So time is not the most important variable when it comes to the dissemination of popularity with fragrances. The internet is just the representation of that. So with all that out the way, let's get into these replacements. First fragrance up here, probably the most hyped fragrance ever. It could be a little debatable between this and Aventus and maybe some others, but honestly, this has way more votes on Fragrantica than Aventus does. That is Dior Saage, the Eau de Toilette. I just like it. It's fine. Honestly, I get a little sick of it after a few hours of wear. I just want it to be gone. It's very linear, but it gets the job done, as people say. If you need something to work for you, then Dior Saage does that. But I don't wear fragrances for that reason most of the time. That's every now and then I'm wearing it purely functionally, not even really considering how I feel about the scent. Every now and then, sure. Nonetheless, I describe Dior Saage with the following adjectives: sexy, fresh, versatile, and shallow. I don't mean shallow in the sense of there's like no substance here, but there's no real depth to the scent itself. Or if we're talking technically, there's not a whole lot going on under the surface here. What you see is what you get. It's pretty linear on the skin, doesn't really change all that much. Not a whole lot of nuance here, but people love it. A fragrance I would replace it with, honestly, is from the house itself. I think it's more updated. I think it's more relevant, and that is Dior Homme 2020. It is all the same things that I described Dior Saage being. It is sexy, it is fresh, it is versatile, it is a little shallow. There's not a whole lot of depth here, but this is what I call simple but not basic. To me, this is way less pervasive than Dior Saage is, which in theory makes it a little bit more likable, honestly, less polarizing, because believe it or not, not, Dior Saage can be not liked by everyone. That could be true for any fragrance, but for as likable as Dior Saage is, it's really sharp. It's very unapologetic. This is a little apologetic. It's a little bit more polite, I would say. Kind of fresh, lemony, but has this musky, slightly unnatural woodiness to it that is very sexy, very alluring, but again, very versatile. You can wear this anytime, anywhere. So I prefer this to Dior Saage any day of the week. Dior Homme 2020. Let's talk about this hype beast, Chanel Allure Homme Sporto Extreme. As you can see, all the fragrances I'm replacing, I own. So I'm not just out here hating from my little corner in the world, pointing fingers at fragrances that I think are not worth it, even though I don't own them. I have these fragrances, I've worn them, I've experienced them, but they're for review purposes. They're for videos like this. I'm not wearing this all the time. My wife actually doesn't even like this fragrance when I wear it, so I don't really touch it, but I can appreciate it for how likable it is. This is what I would call sweet, fresh, casual, and it's also inoffensive in the air. Up close, I can see people not liking this because it smells very synthetic. And sweet fresh is a very particular descriptor because the right balance of sweet and fresh in most mainstream fragrances is what makes them what they are. For some reason, that just speaks to most people. You get that balance right of those two elements and you have yourself a likable fragrance, and hopefully it has a little bit more depth than that. This doesn't have a ton more depth than that. So a fragrance I would recommend instead is from Rosas. It's called LOM Rosas. Again, I do say that it is sweet, fresh, it's casual, and it's very inoffensive in the air. And honestly, I find it a little bit more interesting. This is a juicy, fresh opening of blood orange, maybe some juniper berry in there. That's what brings a lot of the sweet freshness. Blood orange is indeed a citrus, but it is not a bright one. This is not super bright sunny day type of citrus. And it does have some pineapple, maybe some kind of amber and woods and things like that. It has a little bit of depth to it, and honestly more depth than the Chanel. Almost has a little bit of this powdery feel to the freshness, which might rub some people the wrong way up close, but we're talking about in the air here. In the air, this is super likable stuff. It's very versatile, and it's way cheaper than the Chanel. If that counts for anything, go ahead and count it. LOM Rosas. From the house of Kilian, one of the most popular fragrances from the house over the past 5 or so years has got to be Black Phantom. This stuff is a phenomenon. All kind of clones have been made of this fragrance. Wow. I really am a fan of Black Phantom. This is dark, delectable, and strong. While it is very sweet, very gourmand, it does have an edge to it. There is an element to it that is not going to speak to everyone. I have seen some people say they don't like how dark it is, even though you have main notes of coffee and caramel and vanilla and rum. It's very sweet. It's almost mouth-watering, but there's this darkness to it. Nonetheless, let's recommend something different. This fragrance caught a little bit of hype last year. I do think I was a part of that hype train. I'm not taking full responsibility, of course, but this is a fragrance I have loved ever since I first smelled it, and I'm going to keep talking about it, especially now that we're back into the cooler seasons. From Vertus, we have Vanilla Oud. The hype has died down on this, I would say. People were ravaging to grab this. Now it's actually more available because people stopped going crazy over it. But I think a lot of people can corroborate how beautiful this is. It is nowhere near as punchy as Black Phantom, but it is no slouch. This is a strong scent. This is easily a 15-hour fragrance or more in terms of longevity. Sweet, warm, ambery vanilla with this slightly dark, edgy oud, but it is very smooth, very tamed, very easy to wear, very luxurious smelling, kind of like the profile of Black Phantom. But honestly, in some ways, maybe a little bit more elegant, even though it is still pretty strong. But I think it's something that wears a little less bombastic than Black Phantom. Nonetheless, I think it functions as a fantastic alternative if we're going to use this lens. That is Vertus Vanilla Oud. I don't need to say much about this one. Parfum de Marly Leighton. Leighton is one of my most worn fragrances ever. It's one of my most complimented fragrances ever. I like Leighton. We go way back. But even to this day, it is so hyped. It's sweet, it's alluring, and it's playful without being juvenile, which I really appreciate. I feel like as a mid-30s man, I can easily pull this off and not feel like a little boy running around in a club. I do enjoy wearing it, but I want to give you something you're not seeing everywhere. I myself gave this fragrance a little bit of hype when I got my nose on it a couple years ago. It actually blew me away. And funny thing is, it reminded me a little bit of Leighton. The more I've spent time with it, it still kind of does, but it's a distant cousin of Leighton. It's almost a more mature, grown-up, sexier, more mysterious version. Maybe just a component of Leighton. This is from Micallef and it's called Desir Toxic. Now, this is probably going to be a little bit more polarizing than Leighton. I think there's a little bit more of a divide in terms of who loves this and who doesn't compared to Leighton. But I consider it to be a very sexy, very alluring fragrance. All the same attributes I used to describe Leighton can be applied to Desir Toxic, but it's a little darker. The cannabis and the oak moss in here lends a slightly darker edge to the scent, but it is quite sweet. Still has a fresh spicy cardamom in there, making it a little bit aromatic and approachable. And the core to the scent is just plain seductive. I would wear it in the same situations I would wear Leighton, but this one I feel like gives me even a little bit more of an edge. That's Desir Toxic. Let me know if you've checked it out. This is a well-loved fragrance, but it's also one of the most polarizing fragrances from Tom Ford, a hallmark classic masterpiece, trailblazing fragrance, Tuscan Leather. Edgy, luxurious, and confident. What I mean by confident is that if you are not wearing this fragrance with confidence, and that is the way you dress, the way you carry yourself, and the way you treat people while wearing it, it will wear you, especially if you're an oversprayer. This is the last fragrance I'd want to overspray. Ugh. Sweet raspberry leather, spicy saffron, a little bit of an herbal thyme in there, almost animalic leaning leather, very edgy, as I said, for the authoritative personality. But we've been talking about it for a very long time. Here's something else. This is by no means unknown, but way less traffic than Tuscan Leather, and maybe just as polarizing, from Amouage, Overture Man. Again, smells nothing like Tuscan Leather. That's not the point of this video, but it gives me the same feeling as Tuscan Leather, and I wear it in the same situations. This is a rich, sweet cognac booziness with smoky woods, but also with some animalic notes. There's something a little sharp about this, especially up close. I don't recommend smelling it up close. Honestly, the opening of this fragrance is one of my favorite parts because it has this splash of bright grapefruit, almost tart, mouthwatering, that kind of welcomes you into this dark, boozy, animalic, smoky, sweet, rich fragrance that is so confident. If you want to turn heads, if you want to make a statement similar to Tuscan Leather, this will help you do that, but please sample first. I believe Max Aroma has samples of this, so do get your nose on Overture Man if you've been putting it off. But me saying that is not guaranteeing you're gonna love it. You have been warned, and this goes for any review from any reviewer on any fragrance. Just because they say you should try something does not mean they're telling you that you're gonna like it. Get a sample of Overture Man. Don't smell it up close right away. See how you feel. Overture Man from Amouage. Let me know what you think of these fragrances, either the originals or my alternatives, down in the comments. Once again, everything's available at Max Aroma, linked in the description. And thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video, click like. That'll let me know you guys want to see a part 3. Let's see. Peace. I'll see you in the next one.